Hi guys! Today we're going to talk about some of my favorite books from 2022. I really tried to narrow this down to 10, but that was impossible. So I had a really great reading year, I thought. There were some excellent sequels, some really great standalones, amazing starts of series, and even a manga series. So let's get into it. This is more or less going to be in like chronological order from the beginning of the year till now. I was going through my Goodreads and picking out the 5 stars that really stood out to me. This is not all of my 5-star reads for the year, but these are like the S tier ones. So starting off with the last book in the Poppy War trilogy, we have The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. This whole series is excellent. It took me a really long time to pick up book 2 because book 1 just really affected me very deeply, and I needed a lot of time to process that book before moving on to books 2 and 3. But once I did, I just had, I don't want to say a great time. I suffered, but I enjoyed it. This is just such a fabulous trilogy by R.F. Kuang. It tackles war, colonialism, and we follow characters that are just like, they shouldn't have been expected to handle the responsibilities that they're given, but there's literally no other option. And it was a very heavy series, but I'm so glad I read it. I loved the characters that R.F. Kuang created for this series. Rin is like, it's like that joke about how I support women's rights, but more importantly, I support women's wrongs. She sort of embodies that character. And even the supporting characters, Neja and Kitai, are just, you're just rooting for them, even though like at certain points of the narrative, their goals are directly in opposition to one another, and it just felt so real and raw. And this third book really just was the icing on top of the very brutal, sad cake. I feel like this ending is a bit controversial, but I also really couldn't see it going any other way. So I love this series. It was pretty much like a 4.5 across the board, but this book in particular I did give 5 stars, and I thought it was incredible, and what a way to start the year. Another really great sequel I picked up was The Bone Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart. I love this series. It is so creative and engaging, and the lore is so unique. And this book really just took book 1 and expanded on all of that, especially the lore regarding the animal companion that is really unique to this series, and I so greatly enjoyed reading about that. I really love the dual perspectives of Lynn and Jovis in this book. Their characters are just, they're so different, and they have such different perspectives on some of the political events going on, but I really enjoyed their dynamic, and again, just the way that this world continues to build is so cool and just such a fun ride. Mephi is my favorite, of course, and I cannot wait for book 3. It was supposed to come out this year, but I think I read that she had to rewrite the whole thing. But yeah, so book 3 comes out next year, and I'm very eagerly anticipating it because this is just one of the coolest sci-fi fantasy series I've ever read. It's very inspired by Eastern Asian mythology and the setting and stuff, but it's also very much its own thing, and I don't know, just something about the combination of all those elements really does it for me. So I can't wait to read this. I think she's also started a new series too that I'm very excited to pick up. There's so many sequels so far. Next up is A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab, the 3rd book in the Darker Shades of Magic series. And this is one of those series that feels kind of strange in the sense that every book just gets better and better. A lot of the times I'll pick up a series, love book 1, and then book 2 or 3 or whatever get a little shaky or go in a direction I don't quite love, but each book in the series just gets stronger and stronger as you get to know the characters better, and different characters meet each other and form these dynamics that are just such a joy to read about. If nothing else, V.E. Schwab is a great character author. Every single character in this series I felt very attached to, felt very well rounded out, and like a whole person. So I loved that. Book 2 really left off on a cliffhanger, and I loved book 2, but book 3 moved me so much. There's just so many really pivotal, poignant moments in this book, and the politics is really interesting, and the main conflict is just it's one of those situations where I have no idea how the characters are going to resolve this issue, and I could try to figure it out ahead of the time, but like I'm just enjoying where the narrative is going. I love this series. It lived up to the hype for me. I love E.E. Schwab, so really wasn't so surprised that I ended up liking the Shades of Magic series so much, and also very excited to hear that she's working on a sequel series. I think it's called Threads of Power, so not exactly sure when that's supposed to come out, but I will definitely be picking it up because the series is phenomenal and I want to read these characters doing pretty much anything, so this was amazing. 2022 was also the year that I finally picked up Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, a certifiable classic. I've loved the movie, and I have watched the TV series, like the limited series as well, and enjoyed that too. And this was a long time coming. It's my best friend's favorite book, and it's one that's been on my shelf for a really long time, but I was so intimidated by it. But this year I was like, no, I'm gonna read it. And I was so pleasantly surprised at how readable it was. Sometimes classics are, again, intimidating because the language is so different and the prose is just a lot more different than what I'm used to. I was really surprised at how funny Jane Austen was. Obviously, I was aware of the love story, but like just her writing voice and the way that she criticizes certain characters or situations. I was really taken aback by that because like the movie and stuff has its funny moments, but they're a little bit more subtle. Jane Austen is just not afraid to call out stupid characters in this book, and it was fabulous. Mr. Bennet in particular was a favorite of mine because like everything he said was a total zinger, and it was great, and I wasn't expecting that. Loved this, and I can't wait to read more by Jane Austen. I did also read Persuasion this year because the movie can't coming out. Didn't love that one quite as much, but I can see why Pride and Prejudice is such a beloved classic. It was such a joy to read, combined with like the happiness of finally getting to this book after years of it being on my TBR, and then also being able to connect to my best friend because we both love the story so much. It was fabulous. I feel like 2022 was the year of the duology for me. One of those in particular that I really loved, especially the first book, is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. This is a retelling of sorts of the legend of the moon goddess Chang'e from Chinese mythology, and this follows her daughter and the adventure that she goes on in trying to free her mom. There's also a delicious love triangle in this story, and this was really fun. I've seen this compared to like Chinese fantasy dramas, which I haven't seen, but like vibe-wise and like aesthetic-wise, totally. I can't speak to the content being similar, but like from what I've seen in like little snippets and videos and stuff, absolutely. This takes place in the Celestial Kingdom, which is full of immortals. Our main character herself is an immortal, and she ends up joining the Celestial Army and also befriending the Celestial Prince. This was so good. I loved the writing. I loved like the characters in this series are just so good, and it's like if you like shipping characters, this is a great story for that. There's a lot of really like melodramatic moments, but I love that, and I mean that only in the best way, really. So this was a really fun series, and I think if you're interested in Chinese mythology, this is probably a really fun one to pick up. I've definitely picked up a couple of books that have mentioned the Legend of the Moon Goddess and stuff, but it was really fun to read like a book that really marinates in that and kind of makes it its own thing. So this was a lot of fun. Another one of my favorites of the year is The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon, and this book is always so hard to describe because it is so strange. We follow an undertaker named Mercy and sort of a ranger bounty hunter guy named Hart, and they're very like enemies to lovers. They don't get along right away, but they're forced to work together a lot because he hunts zombies down, and once he takes them out, he brings their body to an undertaker, and that way the body can be prepped and given a proper funeral. And even though these people are zombies, they were real people once too. So I really loved the respect for the dead that this book writes about, and the romance at the heart of this is so good. Their banter is like top tier. It's great. Again, I have such a hard time talking about this book because like there's such weird elements, like a person's soul resides in their appendix, and there's also mail carriers that are like talking animals and they're the sassiest things. It's great. So this also has a bit of like a You've Got Mail setup where they're pen pals, but they don't know that they're each other's pen pal, and that leads to fun shenanigans, of course. So highly recommend this book, especially if you like fantasy romance. This is not your traditional fantasy by any means, but it is so endearing and so unique. I have no idea how Megan Bannon came up with this concept, but I absolutely loved it, and this was like a great like summer into fall read especially. It was just so good and so fun and so funny and then so heartwarming. It truly had it all. I feel like this next book is going to be on a lot of favorites lists. It definitely has won a lot of awards so far for like best of the years, both with Goodreads and Book of the Month, especially so far. And that is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And I feel so vindicated in this because I read an arc of this and I cried on public transit reading this. This was so good and moving. I have loved Gabrielle Zevin for a really long time. And I was actually so fortunate to be able to attend an author event with her where she signed my book, and I was telling her that her book Elsewhere gave me my first existential crisis when I read it in middle school, because that book deals with death in a way that I think I had never really thought about before. So we laughed about that, and I mentioned that this book had given me my most recent existential crisis. She signed my book, Two Existential Crises, and I was delighted by that. So she seems like a lovely person. It is certainly everywhere by now, but in case you haven't heard, this book follows two friends, Sam and Sadie, as they grow up together. They have a falling out, they reconnect, they bond over video games and start making video games together. And you don't have to love video games to love this story or to connect with this story, but it certainly helps. This story is really all about how platonic relationships or working relationships can somehow or sometimes be more profound even than like romantic relationships, and basically all the shapes and forms that love can take. And I just thought that was so unique. You don't really read a lot about like friendships that are quite as impactful as the friendship that takes place in this book. So it really moved me. I loved it. I loved the writing style. I don't necessarily think it's going to be for everyone. I've certainly seen negative reviews of this already, but I do think it deserves the accolades it's starting to rack up because it is just such a beautiful and moving book. I think it was over the summer that I picked this next book up, but that is Spy Family by Tatsuya Endo. This is a manga series. It's currently got 8 volumes, and I'm not really talking about necessarily one specific volume, but more the whole series that I absolutely loved this year. It really reinvigorated my love of manga, and I feel like I've been like so much more into it this year because of Spy Family. It just really truly has like all the things I love about manga the most, and it just makes me smile and laugh, and it's the cutest, but also like it's not necessarily a cute situation. And at this point, I've talked about this series on my channel so much, you're probably sick of hearing it. But in case you're just tuning in, Spy Family follows a spy named Twilight, and he is undercover in a rival country trying to get close to a politician who is like notoriously very reclusive. So Twilight ends up adopting a little girl named Anya, who he doesn't know is a telepath, in order to get her into a school that this politician's son also goes to in order to get close to him. So lots of hijinks ensue. He also ends up getting a fake wife named Yor, and she's an assassin. Twilight doesn't know Yor is an assassin. Yor doesn't know Twilight is a spy. Anya knows who both of these people are, and she thinks it's the coolest thing ever. It's just great. Like, it's the perfect setup, really. I love the found family element. There's also a lot of, like, room for comedy in this book. Anya, in particular, is so funny. She's probably one of my favorite characters, honestly, in a series ever. I just think she's so endearing, and I can't wait to see where it goes. I've read all 8 volumes that are out in English right now, and I'm desperate for more because it's truly the perfect manga series. Another fantasy romance I really loved this year was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is book 1 in her Regency Fairy Tales series, and it's basically like if Bridgerton like had fae in it, and it's fabulous. Like, what a combination. I really loved the way that Olivia Atwater really balanced the romance in this story with like real social issues. It was done so elegantly, and like I was never more interested in one storyline than the other. Like, it was just balanced beautifully. The story follows a young woman named Dora, and she basically, as a child, a fairy ripped away half of her soul, and he would have taken it all if her cousin hadn't saved her. And as she grows up, she finds that like she doesn't feel like emotions the way that most other people do. She feels very detached from them, but like she does feel things. It's just kind of in a muted way. She ends up meeting the Lord Sorcerer named Elias, and he's a very curmudgeonly guy. He's very sort of disillusioned with the upper class and propriety in general, honestly. He really identifies societal issues and empathizes with them and does everything he can to try to help those issues, and he has no patience for people that like don't want to talk about the ugly side of society because it's not proper, when like they could actually do something to help take care of the problem. So when these two meet, he's immediately kind of fascinated by her problem. She can handle him in a way that a lot of young women can, because she also really has very little care for what's considered proper for a young woman in this society, and their banter and everything is just so cute. Again, you have this really endearing romance, but then they're also trying to tackle like workshop conditions and like orphaned children and helping them out and stuff, and it's a beautiful balance, and you wouldn't think that this short little book could tackle it all, but it really does. This is the first in a series of standalone romances. They're like very loosely connected, but this one so far has been my favorite. I love Dora and Elias, and I honestly wish there were more books about them because I would read a dozen of them basically. Then we have A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. This is book 2 in the Monk and Robot series, and I loved this one even more than the first one. I love the setup for this novella series. We follow a tea monk who is kind of just trying to find their way in life and figure out what they can do to basically feel fulfilled. And they end up meeting a robot in the wilderness, and in this world, robots put down their tools generations ago and went out into the wilds, and society has found a way to continue on without robots and mechanized things, and their friendship is just so endearing and beautiful. And I love the robot Mosscap. I love a fish out of water, and Mosscap is the ultimate fish out of water. They are so fascinated by humans, and they want to know like every little thing, and it is so precious. So I love this installment. This is the ultimate feel-good, soft fantasy story, and I would read dozens of these. I've also talked about this series a lot on my channel so far, so sorry about that, but I really truly do love them, and I can't wait for the next one. I also picked up Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, which I feel like has also been a bit of a booktube darling this year, but this really initiated like a deep love for T. Kingfisher that I was not expecting. I feel like I've been trying to like gather all of her books and stuff, and I've loved every single one that I've read so far. Granted, that's only 3, but you know, I'm trying my best. Yeah, so Nettle and Bone specifically is a standalone kind of fairy tale. It's got like a dark fairy tale feel to it. We follow a princess named Mara. She's in her 30s at this point. She's the youngest daughter. She was never married off, but she was given to like a nunnery, and she finds later in life that her sister, who was married off to a prince, is being treated pretty horribly. He's very abusive. So she's trying to get her sister out of this situation, and she will literally kill this prince if she has to do that. She ends up enlisting the help of she's called a grave witch in the flap, and I feel like that's not what they call her in the actual book, but I can't remember. Basically, she can talk to dead things, and she has like a possessed chicken, which is great. There's also a reluctant fairy godmother, a disgraced knight, and a dog made of bones. And it's whimsical, it's dark. I love T. Kingfisher's prose, and Mara herself I thought was like a very relatable feeling character in like a way that you don't often see in fantasy. So I loved everything about this. It's a really short book. It's like 250 pages. I cannot wait to read the rest of T. Kingfisher's backlog because it's so varied and there's like a book for everyone, it feels like. So yeah, I loved this book, and T. Kingfisher is now one of my new favorite authors. This really was the year of the sequel for me. We also have The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber, and I swear this book broke my brain. I was really lucky enough to receive a arc of the audiobook, and I really loved the audiobook narrator's performance. She was fabulous. I've since gone back and read Caraval as well, and I think it's the same narrator, so that's awesome because I really liked her. This is the sequel to Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is the spin-off series of Caraval. I love these characters so much, and holy curses, did they have to go through a lot in this book, but like reading Evangeline and Jax go on this adventure, and like Jax is just like the most toxic favorite of mine. I can't help it. I know it's on purpose, but I also feel like something is wrong with me when I'm like rooting for Jax, even though he's done horrible things. And then Evangeline is also a really fun heroine. And again, they go through it in this book. My God. And that ending, I feel like I can't even say too much because everything about this book is just, it would be one giant spoiler if you haven't read it yet, but trust me when I say this was fabulous. And if you liked the Caraval series, or even if you've read Once Upon a Broken Heart and haven't gotten to The Ballad of Never After yet, I strongly recommend it. Stephanie Garber is about to announce the third book, like what the title is going to be in a couple of days. So very excited. And I need my hands on the third book pretty much immediately, and she's not even done with it, which is frustrating, but yeah, I really discovered in this past year or so that Stephanie Garber is such a fun author, and literally I've never had a bad time reading one of her books, so really excited to see where the story goes, and I had so much fun reading this one. I was so engaged and tuned in, which when you're reading an audiobook, or listening to an audiobook rather, it's like that's the best kind of experience you can have. Like, you're just sitting there listening to it because you don't want your attention to go to anything else. And I finally read The Strange the Dreamer duology by Laini Taylor. This first book in particular, I loved so much. It has a bit of like an Atlantis, the Lost Empire setup in the beginning, where you have this kind of outcast academic who's obsessed with this lost city. In this book, it's named Weep, and he finally gets the chance to go and see it for himself, even though nobody believes it still exists. It's just the way that he falls in love with this city and everything about it is so moving. I love the main character, Laszlo. He's so, like, I feel like I've said endearing about so many characters in this whole video, but he truly is one of the most endearing characters I've ever read about. Like, he's soft but confident, and like he is very knowledgeable, and just the way that he views the world is beautiful. Him and the other main character, Sarai, really bond over like his imagination and his dreams in a quite literal sense. I just thought this book was so lovely. One of the most beautifully written YA books I've ever read. Like, truly, I cannot wait to read more of Laini Taylor's books because it was phenomenal. I loved this whole story and like the culture she set up. Weep itself was like such an interesting social situation, and then like the way that gets expanded upon in book 2, like it blew my mind. So yeah, absolutely love this duology. This first one in particular I thought was perfection, and it was amazing. And finally, one of my most anticipated books of the year, I'm so happy and relieved it lived up to my anticipation for it and the hype that was surrounding it. Is Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. This is the sequel to Legendborn, which I think came out in 2020. I was obsessed with that book. It was so phenomenal and like really truly blew my mind. It's one of the most like hard-hitting and fun, but also dark YA series I've ever read. That first book in particular, I feel like started in a great place, felt familiar. We had kind of an academic setting, an outsider getting involved with this like organization, and she's sort of the proxy for the audience. Like, it starts off in a very familiar place, but it truly goes in a direction that I just never would have been able to imagine. And again, kind of a common theme through all these books, the characters I am so attached to. I love Bree in particular. I think she's an amazing protagonist. I also really love Selwyn. He's my boy. But Nick too. I've talked about this series a lot on my channel as well. It's a King Arthur, not retelling, but perhaps continuation. Bree ends up getting involved in this secret society where many of the members are descendants of King Arthur and his table of knights, and they basically have to fight demons. How Bree gets involved with this is really interesting, and like what it means for her to be a black person in the middle of like a bunch of whiteness is also really, it's hard to read about, but it's done so beautifully. And this sequel just went places I never would have been able to imagine because of her own unique experiences. And again, I can't talk about this book too much without spoiling the first one, but this was a phenomenal follow-up. It was literally like turned up to 11 the entire book. I could not put this down because Tracy Deonn just did not give you any time to breathe, basically, and you really felt that sense of urgency and desperation that the characters are feeling while they're dealing with all their problems in this one. So I thought this was masterfully done. I did have a couple issues with it, but like totally outshone by everything else I loved about it. So this was such a phenomenal read. I'm so glad I got to it, and I need the third one stat. So yeah, that's gonna wrap up my favorites for 2022. I had such a great reading year, and I feel like I say that every year, but honestly, it truly just keeps getting better and better. I feel like as I learn my own tastes better, I'm picking up books that I feel like call out to me better as well. And yeah, it's just been such a fun time. And I want to thank you guys all for being on this reading journey with me ever since I started my channel. Not trying to get too sappy here or anything, but this has been a really fun experience, and I love being able to talk about my favorite books with you guys. Please feel free to comment down below. What was your favorite book of the year? Was it any of these? If so, I'd love to talk about it, but I'd love to hear what your favorite book was anyways. In case I haven't read it, I'll put it on my TBR for next year. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Also feel free to check out my socials down in the links below. Like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, have a lovely day and have a happy new year. Bye.